Good morning, everyone. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for more people to join, and we'll be right back with you.
What do I need? Mic on. Where's my face? Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Lori Waters. I'm the program manager for the Active Transportation Program at the California Transportation Commission. And this is our fourth workshop already for the 2023 Active Transportation Program, or Cycle 6. And so before we get started, Justin is going to go over how you can participate today in today's meeting. Justin?
Thank you, Lori. Welcome to the 2023 Active Transportation Program Central Workshop. The CTC exists to make transportation planning, funding, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our meetings normally take place in diverse locations around the state so that commissioners can see firsthand the variety of infrastructure issues around California. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. For the public, we welcome comments from the public as part of each item at this meeting. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as early into the item as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. You should see the webinar control panel likely located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio and questions tabs. Under the audio tab, attendees will have the choice to listen in via computer or telephone option. Should you prefer computer audio, please ensure the appropriate box is selected. If you choose the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak to the commission should you have any comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with the other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee and can create confusion for staff when making comments. There are two options for participants to provide comments on agenda items. Click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Alternately, you may use the questions tab, type in the item number you're commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. Please do your best to be concise with your comments. Also, make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Thank you all for joining us today. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you sharing some of it with us. Thank you.
Okay, one thing I will add is please be a little bit patient with us because there's 4 of us in the room here, and so it requires when we switch people, I have to hit various buttons and I forget every single time. So if you hear an echo, it's just I was late on pushing the right button. So, okay, we're gonna get started now. And for today's workshop, for my inspirational active transportation story, as we had talked about, one of the topics for today is non-infrastructure projects. So I was trying to think of something to do today that was related to non-infrastructure, and I couldn't really think of anything. And then I got a notice from my daughter's school last month that November 17th was Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day. So I thought, oh, well, okay, that's a good one. Let me find out about that, and I'll talk about that at the workshop. So that's for my relatively brief inspirational ATP story. That's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so like I said, the Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day event this year was on November 17th, 2021. Okay, next slide. So many of you probably already know who Ruby Bridges is, but here's a reminder of her story. Ruby was born in 1954 in Mississippi and moved to New Orleans when she was 2 years old. And 1954 was the same year that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus Board of Education to end racial segregation in public schools. Southern states tried to resist the ruling and integrating, and Ruby began her schooling at a New Orleans kindergarten, a segregated kindergarten. But when federal courts forced Louisiana to desegregate, Ruby School District created some sort of biased entrance exams for African American students that they had to pass to see if they could keep up with the white students if they were to go to the white school. So Ruby and 5 other students passed the exam. So Ruby was set to attend the all-white William France Elementary School, which was walking distance from her home. And in November of 1960, she became the first African American student to integrate an elementary school in the South. Next slide. Okay. So this is a picture of Ruby walking to school. So Ruby and her mother were escorted by 4 federal marshals to the school every day that year. And she passed crowds screaming vicious slurs at her. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit messed up on my notes here. Okay, and this is another picture of her walking into school. I picked this picture because it shows how little she is going into the school. Okay, and then next here's the crowds of these horrible racist mobs that she had to pass every day. On one particular day, this woman would hold a coffin with a black baby in it for Ruby to see as she passed by. That was the kinds of things that she had to face. And many white parents withdrew their kids from the school, and only one teacher, Barbara Henry, would teach Ruby. So she went to class by herself for the whole year, but she never missed a day of school. Next. So many of us know about Ruby from this famous Norman Rockwell painting, The Problem We All Live With. This was painted in 1964, and the painting itself was controversial at the time. The painting's permanent home is at the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, but it has traveled all over, including being on loan to the White House when President Obama was in office. Right now, it's undergoing periodic conservation. And then I had to show a picture of Ruby's mom. This is Lucille Bridges. As a mom myself, I think that her mom is also an extremely brave hero. Ruby's dad didn't really want her to go to the white school because he feared for her safety. And her mom did too, but she was determined that Ruby would have equal access to educational opportunities, the same as the white children. So Lucille walked with Ruby every day, but I just can't imagine how scary that was for her as her mom. Okay. This is Ruby Bridges today. She graduated from a desegregated high school and had a successful career as a travel agent. She's also a civil rights activist and has written several books. She has a new one coming out next year. This was a children's book that she wrote. In 1999, she established the Ruby Bridges Foundation to promote tolerance and create change through education. Next. So then in 2018, a group of fifth graders from Martin Elementary School in South San Francisco, California, learned about Ruby and asked why there wasn't a day honoring her. The kids then made it their own project by first asking their own school board to pass a resolution making November 14th Ruby Bridges Day. Next, the San Mateo County Office of Education Safe Routes to School team worked with the students to make it a walk to school day. A resolution was then passed in San Mateo County designating November 14th as Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day in San Mateo County. The San Mateo Safe Routes to School team promoted the event to other schools and were successful in getting 14 schools to participate in 2018 and 25 in 2019. Since then, the event has really gained momentum with over 90,000 students from 36 states celebrating November 17th of this year as Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day. And the event is now the hallmark event for the Ruby Bridges Foundation. Through the Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day, students learn about the civil rights movement, the importance of inclusion, and that all students should be able to walk to school safely. And then in September of this year, the Senate proclaimed November 14th Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day to honor Ruby Bridges. And it was proposed by State Senator Josh Becker. This is a picture of the senator with the kids. Next one. And this is just some pictures of the event from this year. Next. And I think this is a picture of school kids in Oregon. And this is just an example of some of the materials that were used. This is from a school in Eugene, Oregon. And in this event, that the students met at the school and they walked, biked, skated, or scootered to their respective schools. They had a breakfast first and various kinds of presentations. So this is just an example of non-infrastructure program. And just to tie it back to the HEP, the San Mateo, I think it's the San Mateo County Health Department has gotten a couple non-infrastructure grants from the program in the first couple cycles of the program. Okay, so that is Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day. Okay, I hope everybody liked that. Guess I should put my face back on. Okay, so we've been going through this in every workshop. Just to remind everybody, I'll go through these slides pretty quick. The program, this cycle has 4 years of funding, fiscal years 23-24 through 26-27. The anticipated funding levels are the same as last cycle, about $445 million. That's split up amongst the three components: the statewide, small urban and rural, and the MPO. So the goals for today, we are going to recap the last workshop and discuss the next steps for housing language. We want to finalize the guidelines language for awarding points for projects in a planning document. But our main topic of discussion today is we wanted to talk about non-infrastructure projects. A couple issues have come up. Some of our stakeholders have asked for a non-infrastructure set aside because the belief is that they've become less competitive in the program. And there's a couple of other issues around non-infrastructure that we wanted to talk about. And then we'll discuss leveraging funds and project size thresholds and some of the minor language changes that we are planned to make if we have enough time for that. And then we will go over action items. This is our schedule for the workshops. So we had 2 guidelines workshops, and then on December 1st, we had the PSR equivalent workshop, which is that posted? Yeah. Okay, the PSR equivalent workshop is posted. So if you are an applicant, please look at that. It'll help you make sure that your application is a project study report equivalent as required in the guidelines. And then this is our last workshop for this year, and then we'll pick up again on January 11th. And we'll have another guidelines workshop. Hopefully we'll be wrapping up guidelines there, and then on January 19th, we'll talk about applications and the scoring rubrics. And then February 23rd, we had as an optional workshop if we needed it. I have a feeling we will need it. That's our schedule. Okay, these are the branch workshops that have been requested. So Alika is working on scheduling those branch workshops. In case you don't know, those are centered around a particular area where we focus on how that county or region has done in the program in the past, what we've seen that they could improve on, and any particular questions they might have. So we don't make guidelines changes or anything like that. We will notice these workshops, but and anybody can attend, but they really are focused on a particular area. Okay, and we are doing site visits. We have over 70 scheduled so far, right, Alika? And so our slots that we had already set aside have been filled, but if you still really want to have a site visit, if you contact Alika, she'll, if you're nice to her, she'll try to find some time for us to have a site visit with you. Okay, and we finalized the schedule at one of our past workshops, and so the important dates here are that we will adopt the guidelines at the March Commission meeting, March of next year, and that's when the call for projects will also be released. But that doesn't mean that you can't start working on your application before then. Please, if you know you're going to apply, you should be thinking about what you're going to put in your application. and they need to be due, they will be due on June 15th. We're only asking for electronic applications. I think we still have postmark date on there. We should probably take that off. And let's see, and then we will release the staff recommendations for the statewide and small urban and rural projects on October 21st. And then we will adopt the statewide small urban and rural component at the December 2022 meeting, and the large MPO component projects, we will adopt those at the June 2023 meeting. Okay, that's kind of just reviewing the general stuff. And then I think I'm turning it over to Beverly. Okay.
Thanks, Lori. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to go over a few things, just recapping our last workshop and decisions that we made, and then some things that we're still trying to finalize. Next slide, please. So as Lori just mentioned, this year we're only asking for electronic applications, so no hard copies are necessary. However, if your application is successful, we may request a copy, or Caltrans may request a copy. Next slide, please. All right, so at our November 9th and 17th workshops, we discussed integrating pro-housing language into the application, building on previous language on housing and affordable housing that was included in Cycle 5. So we are now working internally to discuss all of the comments that this group gave us, and then we're working to finalize the language internally and in collaboration with stakeholders. So we will continue this discussion at the January 11th workshop. Next slide, please. All right, so this is what we're hoping to finalize today. So at our November 17th workshop, we also discussed adding language that awards points to projects that are included in an adopted act of transportation or similar plan. And just as a reminder, the goals of adding this language are to have applicants demonstrate that the project is a priority for the community and demonstrate that the project went through a robust planning process. And this language would only apply to large infrastructure and large infrastructure, non-infrastructure combination projects. So again, as a reminder, as discussed in the last workshop, we're not going to be including a list of eligible plan types. So the applicants will have flexibility to use different types of plans, and what we're specifically looking for are plans that have gone through a comprehensive public engagement process. So the next slide, please. All right, so the additional language is in bold underline. So the original language for this section is just in plain text. And so the new language would read, additionally, for large infrastructure and large infrastructure / non-infrastructure combination projects, applicants will be awarded points for the inclusion of a project in an adopted active transportation plan or similar plan. Eligible plans should have been developed through a comprehensive public engagement process. So we'll open it up for any final questions or comments related to this language. So I will hand things over to Justin now to see if we have any comments.
Not having public comments other than comments the audio in the room. I have a little bit trouble hearing.
Thank you. All right, hopefully that's a little bit better. Yeah. All right. Hopefully that's better. Sorry about the audio problems, and sorry, hopefully everyone could hear me, but the the text is on the screen, the additional language in bold underline. So we'll give it another minute or so to see if anyone has any comments, final comments on this language. And if not, we can move on.
Do you have one written comment this time?
Thank you, Beverly. We do have one written comment submitted at this time. Hank Singh asks, does the ATP plan include a Vision Zero plan?
Yes, it does. So we know there are lots of different types of plans out there, and that's why we're not putting a specific list. So yes, a Vision Zero plan will work for this. And I think when we talk about the actual application, we'll talk about how this portion will be integrated into that question, and it might involve like I can see like maybe like a text box where you can kind of explain like what the plan is and how like the public engagement process or something like that. So yes, definitely a Vision Zero plan would work.
Mike Pickford asks, is there a definition of a similar plan?
Nope. Again, so when we work out the application, like how this will look in the application, I think there will be like, as I just mentioned, a box where you can type in and kind of just discuss how, like how your plan is a similar plan, but there won't be like a set definition. We want to make it as flexible as possible because we just know there are so many different types of plans out there.
I was just gonna add that, okay, I know everybody, maybe you want to know specifically, but the last thing you want us to do is put a list of actual plans that we're going to take in there. It's much better for everyone if we keep it more general, because we don't know what all the plans are that applicants might have. So it's better if we keep it general, and as long as you meet the criteria of the plan, then you should get the points for that.
Loretta Ellard asks, why does this only apply to large projects?
So we originally presented large and medium, and we heard from stakeholders that it would be best to just put it in large. So if you look at the applications get progressively more complex the larger the project. So with these large projects, we've always expected them to have gone through a more extensive engagement process. Kind of what we tell our evaluators is that the amount of engagement and planning should match the complexity and magnitude of the project. So that's just kind of aligned with like our philosophy that we've always had with public engagement. And, you know, maybe in the future we might require it. It's another thing that we try to do. We try to slowly integrate new things into the program, kind of step by step, to make sure that we give our applicants a fair chance. And Laura, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just add that also the expectation is that a large project is more likely to be actually listed in a plan. Sometimes with smaller projects, they aren't called out specifically. They may be rolled up as active transportation projects. So for right now, we will just require it for large projects. But if you're submitting in the medium or the small or whatever, and if your project isn't a plan, go ahead and talk about that. It'll just help you.
Yeah, for sure. If your project is in a plan, you should definitely be talking about that in your narrative. That the evaluators really like to see that.
From Denise Arriaga, she asks, would applicants receive points for draft plans?
So that's a good question. The language currently reads an adopted active transportation plan. I don't know if we'll be doing any scaling with the points.
Denise, what do you, if you can come off mute and tell us what you're talking about, then we can probably address it better.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We can, and that was our fault because we didn't have our.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, so I know that there's a couple of like plan refreshes that we have in the works, and I need to check with our ATP coordinator on the timing of when any final adoption or approval by our board would take place. So I'm just wondering if, depending on timing of whether or not that would be required for submittal or for guideline adoption, that's kind of where that's coming from.
So Denise, you're saying that you have a plan, but it's being updated, and the project that you might be submitting isn't in the project that's, isn't in the plan that's adopted now, but will be in the one that's in draft that will be adopted. Is that what you're thinking could happen?
Right, and I am, it's a specific case to us, right? But I imagine that there may be also other agencies that if they have a plan that's substantially completed, but just the timing might not match up with whatever the requirement is for adopted plan, if it's that specific in guidelines. So maybe consideration for partial points if a plan is maybe has a scheduled approval date, or from draft to final isn't really going to go through substantial changes.
To me, if it's in a draft plan, that kind of meets the spirit of what we're looking for. So we can talk about it more when we actually do the application and the scoring rubrics, but in my mind, that's meeting the spirit of what we're looking for. So I will say right now, I don't see that as being a problem.
Great, thank you.
Loretta Ellard followed up with her question about this only applying to large projects by asking, but small or medium projects would not be able to get the extra awarded points. Is that correct?
So it wouldn't be extra points. It would be integrated into the scoring for that question within the large infrastructure project. So all of our project types all of the applications are out of 100 for each project type, but their scaling of each question is different. So when we get to where we're talking about the applications, this question may get more points within the large infrastructure application, or we may just keep it the same and it'll just be an additional section. So it's not really bonus points, or medium and small projects wouldn't lose out on these points because their scaling is different. And again, if the project isn't a plan and it's medium or small, definitely talk about it, because that will help you get the points you need in the public participation and planning question.
I just want to remind everybody that we are finalizing the language because we talked about this at a prior workshop, and we try to keep things moving forward. If people, and the will of the stakeholders was that this would just be a question in the large. If everyone's saying now they also want this in the medium, then we can do that, but that's not what we heard before.
We do have a couple of attendees with their hand raised at this time. Up first, we'll call on Mike Woodman.
Hi, Beverly. Hi, Lori. This is Mike Woodman with Nevada County Transportation Commission. Appreciate the flexibility on this one of being able to include the project in similar plans. just to give an example for maybe some of the stakeholders or folks that were wondering, what is a similar plan? On one of our projects, we'd identified improvements that were needed within a corridor, and then did a FHWA safety audit, and then followed that up with an actual planning study, working with the public that defined the improvements within that corridor. So we have that adopted, State Route 49 corridor improvement multimodal plan that identifies all the projects. So appreciate that flexibility.
Thanks, Mike.
Next up, we have Carl Anderson.
Morning, everyone. Carl Anderson with MTC staff. We all knew this was coming since the last guidelines. It's been in the guidelines since then. So we're supportive of the language and just very appreciative of the flexibility that you'll be giving project sponsors for the types of plans that you'll be considering. I'd also just add or encourage you to exercise some flexibility in how they describe the plan or how they describe the project in the plan. Because I know a lot of project plan or a lot of plans do not have the full scope, if you will, but rather just the project title. So I think that would be sufficient to account for those points. That's all.
Thanks, Carl.
I do not see any other attendees with their hand raised at this time, but we do have a couple more written questions that were submitted. Up first, we have Mark Freelander, who asks, what if an agency is in the process of updating a plan and a large project is included, but it's not yet adopted?
I think we just covered that with Denise's question. So when we go through the application, like putting together this question within the application, we can discuss this more, but we think that, as Lori mentioned, that fits within the spirit of what we're asking for. So we'll figure out something for those instances. Thank you.
From Liliana Diaz, she writes, to clarify, if the project is not in any plans, we include that information and discuss why it is not in plans?
Yeah.
I don't understand that question. If she can come off mute, yeah. I don't.
Liliana, you're now muted.
All right, thank you. So my question is, if it's not in a plan, if the project is not in any plan, do we include that discussion in our application, or do we not even mention it?
You have a project that would qualify as a large infrastructure project that you want to submit, but it's not in any kind of plan at all?
If that were the case, yes.
Then you wouldn't get the points. I mean, you could talk about why that would be. It seems a little odd to me, but I guess you could talk about why that would be, and that would be considered in the scoring. But you know, we're being pretty clear, as Carl mentioned. We've been talking about this for actually probably since maybe the second cycle. We've been saying we were going to do this, and so it should not be a surprise at all.
Okay, thank you.
And then we do have Carl Anderson again looking to make comment. Carl, you're free to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I forgot one piece. I just want to be mindful of another topic that's on the agenda, is potentially changing the project size thresholds. And since we are adding more requirements for the large projects this time around, I just want to make sure that we are aware that we might be changing the goalposts on a few project sponsors that might fall in the large category, the medium category, depending on what we decide on that agenda item. And I just want to highlight that, just because many people were relying on the project, on the ATP guidelines staying as consistent with previous cycles. So just want to make sure commission staff's aware of that.
What do you mean, Carl?
Well, since we're adding a little bit more requirements for the large projects,
it's not much. So
We're still adding.
Okay.
And if we are considering changing the project size threshold, there may be some, whether it's higher or lower, there may be some project sponsors that might be in that category where they were relying on things being consistent from last cycle, whereas now they might be encountering some new changes for the applications.
Yeah, exactly. And and we'll talk about that when we talk about the size thresholds, because to me, there's pros and cons to changing the size threshold. And one of them is that you might have a project that you submitted last cycle that you want to submit again this cycle, and now you're in a different project application.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I see no other attendees looking to make public comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. All right, we can move on. And I think I'm up first. So we are now going to start on a new topic that we wanted to discuss today. Next slide, please. Okay, so we wanted to discuss non-infrastructure projects today, and specifically the first thing that we wanted to talk about today was a potential set aside for non-infrastructure projects. So the ATP allows applicants to apply for standalone non-infrastructure projects as well as combination infrastructure plus non-infrastructure projects within the program. So we've had some stakeholders request that we do a non-infrastructure set aside for standalone projects in this cycle to help encourage agencies to apply for these projects. So as a reminder, in cycle 1, we did have a non-infrastructure set aside for Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure projects. And to meet the requirements of this set aside, $21.6 million was programmed to Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure projects in cycle 1. And in order to meet this statutory requirement, some of these projects were prioritized over other project types, meaning that these non-infrastructure projects were funded over other types of projects that had higher scores. And then this requirement was removed from statute after cycle 1. Next slide, please. And so we also wanted to just give you an idea of how non-infrastructure projects are doing in the program. And this is just kind of an overview of how they did in cycle 5. So we had 15 standalone non-infrastructure projects submitted in cycle 5 with $16.3 million in requests, which was about 0.73% of the total funding request. 2 of these projects were funded in the statewide and small urban and rural components with $3.1 million in funding, which was about 1.1% of the statewide and small urban and rural funding. And so overall, these projects had a 13% success rate compared to an 11% success rate for all other project types. And this is just in statewide and small urban and rural. And then we also received 74 combination infrastructure plus non-infrastructure projects, and they had $558.1 million in ATP requests, which was about 16% of the funding request. 16 of these combination projects were funded in statewide and small urban and rural components with $90 million in funding, which was about 32.5% of the funding overall. And that 90 million isn't just non-infrastructure, obviously, it's the ATP requests for both the infrastructure and non-infrastructure components of these projects. So in total, the non-infrastructure funding for these projects was about $4.5 million. And so combination projects had a 22% success rate. And again, this is compared to an 11% success rate compared to all other project types. So that is some background, and now I'm going to hand over to Lori. I don't know if she has anything to add, and she's also going to help facilitate the discussion on this topic.
Okay, thanks, Beverly. So just to give just some more background on this, commission staff that was not proposing this. This came from stakeholders, but the stakeholders were making a decent case to us that it's something that we should talk about with everyone. Our statistics are not showing a need for a set aside for non-infrastructure. They seem to be as successful as other kinds of projects, and we're seeing that there's a lot of more projects that are combination infrastructure, non-infrastructure. However, statistics can tell you lots of different things, and we're also seeing a decrease in the number of standalone and non-infrastructure applications that are being submitted. That could be because those applicants are feeling like they cannot, like it's too difficult to compete against infrastructure projects. So it could be showing that. It's hard, you know, we can't ever know that. So in terms of doing set-asides, I would say the commission itself has not been real supportive of that. Beverly mentioned the first cycle. I had just started with the commission when we were finishing up the first cycle of the ATP. I hardly knew what was going on at that time. All I remember was some controversy about, you know, non-infrastructure projects, because we ended up, because of statute, we programmed non-infrastructure projects that scored lower than infrastructure projects, which the commissioners were, and a lot of stakeholders were not happy about. But that we have a different makeup of the commission now, and while I would say we don't really like having set-asides in the program, I'll have to admit, if we're going to continue quick builds, we might always have to have a set-aside for quick builds. So there are times where there could be a place for one. So I think that's all I wanted to say. So we wanted to bring this to the group because we thought it was a legitimate issue to talk about, and we want to hear from all of you. And in this case, when we aren't really sure what we want to do, we want to hear from stakeholders, see what everybody thinks, and then generally we'll go back and think about it, talk to our management, and then make our proposal, come back with a proposal. So now we just want to open it up to discussion and hear what people think.
Thank you, Lori. Up first, we have Corey Wilkerson.
Hey, Lori. Hey, Beverly. Good morning. I think that I don't think that we should be doing a set aside for non-infrastructure in the statewide component. I think that I mean, I don't know. I know of one stakeholder that submitted 3 non-infrastructure, submitted and was funded for 3 non-infrastructure projects. If you look at the MPO component and the statewide component put together, and they competed very well. I think that non-infrastructure has always competed very well, and that we do tend to see, especially when they're the combination projects. I've always told people like to consider adding non-infrastructure to your infrastructure projects, because those projects really do seem to get an advantage in the scoring. Perhaps you might want to look at it for, and it doesn't impact me very much, but you might want to look at it for small, urban, and rural. And I think that perhaps MPOs may want to consider doing some sort of set aside for non-infrastructure in their MPO components, but not in the statewide component. I think that's something that MPOs should be, you know, if they want to prioritize, they can prioritize on their end. And maybe you guys consider for small, urban, and rural if there's support from those communities for a set aside. But I think that that's something that should be more considered on a region by region basis rather than on the statewide program as a whole. As the statistics show, non-infrastructure seems to compete just fine. There does seem to be a like less applications being submitted from cycle to cycle, and maybe that's because there's other funding sources that are available to fund these types of projects that are a lot easier to use, namely like OTS funding. So that might be why we're seeing less of these projects come through, and the ones that we do seem to that do come through seem to be larger non-infrastructure projects. They're closer to the $1 million range, and that generally constitutes larger non-infrastructure projects. So I don't know. That was just my thought.
Thanks, Corey. That's an interesting point that you make. I think the large MPOs and the MPO component, that is something that you all could have discretion over. If you wanted to do it in the large MPO, you can. Right. So what Corey is proposing sort of is that, since in a way the small urban and rural component is parallel to the MPO component, so we could, that is one option, is that not do it in the statewide, but have a set aside in the small urban and rural, since the large MPOs can do that in their programs. So that is an option. Thanks, Corey.
Yeah, and like I said, it's only if those communities are really looking for that. And I assume that you guys have separate stakeholder meetings with folks that fall into that category, and maybe that's more an appropriate place to have that discussion. But I think if MPOs want to prioritize it, it's up to them.
We're getting confused on our buttons.
Did you hear anything?
The beginning part we did.
We did. Tori, I'm so sorry. Could you come back on? We missed the second part after you replied to Lori, because our audio wasn't working.
As long as it's like not my fault. It's always my favorite when I talk and then there's dead silence afterwards. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Corey.
No, I was just saying that if it's a priority for small urban rural, I'm assuming you guys have like separate stakeholder engagement that you guys do with those folks that fall into that category. And if it's a priority for them, then great. Maybe you consider it for small urban rural. And the same thing applies for me. If my stakeholder group was asking for prioritization, and we do a little bit of prioritization for some non-infrastructure. We do a little set aside that we, based on what's allowed in the guidelines, that up to 5% kind of set aside. We do that, but it has to be something that is more of a local, regional kind of idea, rather than something that is for the whole state. Those projects seem to compete just fine. I don't know.
Great, thank you.
Up next from Joel Campos, they ask, would the set aside apply to the combined non-infrastructure and infrastructure as well, or just for non-infrastructure?
So this proposal is for it to just be for the standalone projects, so not the combination projects.
And just so everyone, we kind of jumped into this. I think I tend to make an assumption that everybody always knows what we're talking about, but and I talked about the Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day as an example of a non-infrastructure. Non-infrastructure projects are for education and encouragement, some kind of campaign or effort that is not necessarily building something. Well, it's not building something. It is doing some sort of a program to encourage walking and biking. A lot of times it's in for schools, but sometimes it's not. It's just in for anyone.
do have a few attendees with their hand raised at this time, as well as we have received a few more written comments. For those with their hand raised, up next we have Peter Williamson. Peter, you're free to unmute yourself and comment.
Hi, are you able to hear me? Looks like
Yeah.
that worked. Okay, great. So just wanted to definitely, on behalf of the work at the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments and MPO, and first point was a clarification. We are actually finishing up cycle 3 non-infrastructure funds right now through November, and then we applied for cycle 5 non-infrastructure funds. So that question is, I guess it was mentioned that that ended at cycle 2, and so I just was looking for clarification, but also wanted to voice that we see this separate source, of funding is a pretty vital component to our regional program. And without that funding, we're somewhat paralyzed to continue the data collection that helps address future non-infrastructure needs and kind of the ongoing sense. We had some pretty great success in cycle 3 with like 83% of our region schools engaging with walk to school day and bike to school day type events. During the pandemic, we actually did a virtual thing and had 100% participate. So that, because of the nature of virtual, we were able to stretch the funding and reach much more schools than we even committed to originally. I think, again, to hone in on the the disadvantaged schools, to spend some time with those schools to get the data and everything, this funding definitely is helpful. Our health agency does the OTS funding, and so we don't want to compete with that. So that again kind of makes this NI very helpful. Another point is that our jurisdictions apply for infrastructure funds, then they typically don't have the capacity to pull off the non-infrastructure side of things. So we typically try to phrase our applications in terms of partnering with those infrastructure plans, because we are in alignment to deliver on non-infrastructure with those jurisdiction partners that apply for the infrastructure only. So just some points, and we would like to see cycle 6 have this category. Thank you.
So I just want to clarify, we're not proposing to get rid of non-infrastructure as a project type. So what we're saying is in cycle 1, there was money specifically set aside for these projects. There was a statutory requirement that we had to do a certain amount of funding for these projects. And we met that statutory requirement, but we got rid of that statutory requirement, went away after cycle 1, but we still continue to fund these non-infrastructure projects. So we're not proposing to get rid of them. We agree that they're completely critical projects. What our stakeholders are suggesting is that require some sort of requirement for the amount that we're funding to non-infrastructure come back. So right now, non-infrastructure just goes into the same competition as everyone else when in the statewide. So everyone submits whatever project they submit, and the highest scoring projects get funded. And if it's a non-infrastructure project that scores a 99, then that project definitely gets funded. Obviously, unless the cutoff score is 100, it wouldn't happen. But anyway, so we're definitely not suggesting that we would get rid of non-infrastructure at all. We know these are very important projects. Lori, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, that's Peter, if you want to come back on, just so we make sure that you understand that non-infrastructure standalone projects are still eligible projects in the program. As Beverly said, right now they just compete with everything else. They have their own application. And so this would be set aside, would be saying that we would fund, I don't even know what we would propose, like 7 million we would make sure would go to non-infrastructure or something like that. That's what we're meaning by a set aside. But yeah, Peter, if you can come back on just to make sure that we know that you understand.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Thank you for that clarification. So it's good that it still will exist. And I do think having an amount set aside is an appealing idea because it's very hard. We have a great problem of not having very many disadvantaged communities and, relying on the regional definitions. So I think having an allocation set aside allows our region to compete despite that handicap of not having as much disadvantage. But, without the funding, our effort kind of gets halted to some degree. So it's still an advocate for seeing a set aside dedicated, like I guess cycle 1 had, but glad to see that it's there regardless. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Jennifer Solis. Jennifer, you're now muted.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Jennifer with Fresno Cog, sorry, we would support not having a set aside for the non-infrastructure projects. I do agree with Corey that they would still, standalone non-infrastructure project would still compete, great. And it just doesn't make sense to fund projects that score lower like that, what has happened in the past. So that's why we would not support having a set aside, or support not having a set aside, sorry. But I would, however, recommend that we maybe revisit the point distribution on the rubrics when we get to that discussion later on in these workshops.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
A written comment submitted by Paul Gergeis. An idea, perhaps a few extra points could be given to a standalone non-infrastructure project that support other projects or networks, not necessarily a part of the ATP application. No set-asides for your consideration. Thank you. We do have Teresa Rogerson.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm Teresa Rogerson from Santa Cruz County Public Health Agency, and I would like to speak in support of the set aside for a number of different reasons. I think one is that as a public health agency, it's nice to be able to have the opportunity to take the lead, instead of always relying on the public works jurisdictions to lead the way on the infrastructure projects and have us just tag on to that with the non-infrastructure. The other thing is we did submit a non-infrastructure project for cycle 5 and we scored very high, but the tiebreaker apparently favored the infrastructure projects. And so we were cut out of making it into being funded for that cycle for that reason. So I think there is overall a bit of a bias towards either combo or infrastructure projects in that sense. And the other thing too for us, we're also similar to what the other speaker said. We're a smaller, county, and we don't have as many disadvantaged communities. But those that we do, doing a non-infrastructure only kind of allows us to focus on to look at the population that we're serving rather than to be project focused. That we can kind of look at where we want to target that work a little bit more closely. And I know someone mentioned, OTS funding, which we also, apply for and compete for as well. But those are, on an annual basis. They're just 1 year long, and so this funding allows for, a longer time period to really. Behavior change is not something that happens in a 1 year period, right? So it's nice to have a longer period of time to implement programs like encouragement and education programs. And then the other thing too is that we are able to work in the entire county. You know, we don't have the restriction of having to stay within a certain jurisdiction with the non-infrastructure work that we do. So if we do have a couple of disadvantaged communities that are in completely different locations in our county, and we can roll those together and try that work with those communities without being limited to just working with each jurisdiction and having multiple projects going on. So it makes it a little easier to do that. As well as partnering with community agencies, which is a really important component that ATP seems to value. And I think it is easier for us to work with those community agencies than it is for public works folks to do that necessarily, because we tend to have a closer relationship with some of those groups that are closer to the populations we're trying to reach. Yeah, thank you. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think your name was Teresa. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Don't leave, because I think that you brought up a couple good points, but I think I want to say that we have no doubt in the value of non-infrastructure projects. Alika and I had the true pleasure of seeing a non-infrastructure project in action, and we thought it was amazing and phenomenal. So that is not at issue at all. And you were talking about the value of standalone non-infrastructure, and we definitely support that. I think what I'd like to hear from you though is, because we still will fund those, but do we need a set aside for them? I think that's what we're really trying to get at, is are we seeing a need for that? But you did bring up something that infrastructure is favored in tiebreakers. That's 100% true. So that's another thing to factor into, something that we could talk about. So if Teresa, if you wanted to, maybe are you thinking that you're seeing a reason for a non-infrastructure set aside?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, and I think that overall, I feel like you know, for folks that are really focused on non-infrastructure, like the public health agencies, I think there is a feeling of like, well, if we don't connect with an infrastructure project, then we're not gonna do as well. So that's just kind of the sense I've always had. You know, back in cycle 1, we did have a non-infrastructure only, and we worked throughout our entire county. I really feel like it was one of the most successful grants that we've received. And since then, it's felt like we are competing with our community agencies to get that little, you know, 10% or 7% piece or whatever the jurisdictions are willing to give to add a non-infrastructure, and that sometimes it just feels like it's being added on, you know, in order to compete better for the infrastructure portion, instead of it really being well thought out for non-infrastructure only. So I think that having a set aside would encourage those agencies that want to do that and that are good at doing that to really do a better job of it, and it still can be in the same areas geographically that other projects are occurring, but it's not necessarily tied to them. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I hope you're trying to, I hope I'm yeah, coming across and you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Teresa. You're yeah. you definitely made some good points on that. Although yours did score high last cycle, you were in the tiebreaker, and it sounds like what you're hearing is that there are some applicants that are discouraged from submitting standalone non-infrastructures because it's just too hard to compete against the infrastructure or infrastructure / non-infrastructure.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Jan LePage.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. Well, Teresa hit all of my points, so I'll be succinct and say I agree with everything she said. This is Jeannie LePage with Ecology Action. We implement non-infrastructure programming, and I know this is not a discussion about the value of NI work, because we've already established there is value in that and the program values it. I think, though, that there are less NI-only applications, and maybe the percentage of success is higher, but there's just sheer less numbers of them than there was in cycle 1. And I think what that telegraphs to NI implementers and potential applicants is it's tough. You're competing against these really vital infrastructure programs that are needed throughout the state. And, you know, if you want to partner with a jurisdiction, which Teresa already laid out, the limitations of that is that you can only then implement your NI programming in that specific geographic region, as opposed to having it be much wider in focus, county-wide, et cetera, that kind of thing. And Corey mentioned the OTS funding. I would just like to touch on that it's a much smaller pot. Teresa also said it's a year, and that focus is strictly safety, whereas ATP is so much more, there's so much more potential for creative behavioral change solutions. And yeah, I often compare it to the anti-smoking campaign with public health. That didn't happen in a year, it didn't happen in 4 years. It's such a comprehensive behavior change. We need all the tools in the toolbox. And I think by having a set aside, that's a message to the state. This is important. This is big behavior change. It does affect greenhouse gas. It's a huge lever. And so you want to be able to empower agencies up and down the state, not just in small rural and urban areas, to be able to implement really innovative, comprehensive programming. So thanks for opening up this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Jeannie, what do you think would be an appropriate set aside if we were to do something like say that we would fund at least some certain amount of non-infrastructure only? What would be an appropriate amount, do you think?
That's really hard to say. I mean, I think I would try to make it formula based, where like maybe you look up and down the state, how many NIs you got, what was the total amount of the NI ask. I think if you have an NI only application, I think Corey mentioned already that they're definitely like $1 million and above. If you're talking about 4 years of staffing and really implementing programs, I think that is a significant, you want to have that. And so how many do you want to see throughout the state? I think that's the way I'd look at it. And if you have like how many different regions and it's $1 million per, something like that, that may not be a popular way of looking at it. And I'm sure there's lots of ways you could slice it. So I defer to somebody else to really figure that out, what feels equitable.
Okay.
Up next, we have Maura Toomey.
Hello. You know, I'm a strong supporter of the non-infrastructure projects, and to Lori's point, I've been the witness of some of them, and they are excellent, and it's really amazing of what they can do. And I would support a set aside. My only concern is really, I think, a concern that somebody else mentioned is that, you know, realistically, the funds for ATP are very limited, and we have such high competition. And the more we bifurcate or restrict the overall pool, limits our ability to fund the best projects, whatever they are, whether they're non-infrastructure or infrastructure. I think if we receive additional permanent funding, whether through the new federal bill or some other, I think that gives us the ability to really look at that as setting up a set aside at that point, because then we're not, you know, draining the pot that's already way too small to do the work we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maura. So Maura's actually bringing up another option too, is that we could kind of qualify that if the program were to get more funding, either through an augmentation or through state augmentation or federal augmentation, that we would have a non-infrastructure set aside. But with the current levels of funding, it's just not feasible. So that is another possibility too. Thank you, Maura.
Up next, we have Dave Campbell.
Good morning, everyone. This is Dave Campbell, Advocacy Director with Bike East Bay in Alameda County and Contra Costa Counties, Oakland, California. And I just joined sort of at the end of the presentation, and I've heard the speaker, so I may have missed something, and I apologize. But here to speak in support of more funding for non-infrastructure projects. The first two speakers I heard definitely agree with the points that they were making. Here in Alameda County, our CMA, the Alameda County Transportation Commission, they put forth around $200,000 this past year to non-infrastructure bike programming as part of a kind of a response during the pandemic, but it's definitely something we need ongoing support for to help the programs that get people on their bikes, to help them fix their bikes in communities that don't have bike shops or other active bike programming going on. To support the infrastructure projects that we are funding and we are building. And we have that demand in many communities in the East Bay, certainly in Oakland and Richmond. We even have it in a city like Fremont, and this is maybe something you can think about. It's not a poor city, it's not a rich city. I don't know that it qualifies in many ways for equity priority communities, but it's a city that's doing wonderful things for Vision Zero, for pedestrian safety, and for bike improvements. And they could use more non-infrastructure programming to get their Safer Streets activated, particularly with bicycling. And I really support and appreciate the emphasis on equity priority communities, but Fremont's my example of, okay, what can we do for a city like Fremont that doesn't qualify as well for that, but could use non-infrastructure funding. And I also want to say that it's important. I think the set aside is important because we still have a lot of planners. We certainly have a lot of elected officials who think of non-infrastructure as a lesser form of funding and a lesser priority. And they use words like, even the previous speaker, I'm not sure exactly what the total intent there was, but used the term of draining the pot. That has a negative connotation to it. And planners often, I hear sort of similar things when they talk about capital projects. They say real projects after they've just talked about a bike programming project or a safe routes to school project. And so there's this inherent in our DNA as transportation professionals, this is considered a lesser thing. And I think the set aside helps make the statement, no, it's equal. And maybe one day it'll be even better. So definitely support it. And I don't think we, the current ATP program has lots of money in it. It's got plenty to fund non-infrastructure. So even if there's no state or federal augmentation, there should be a strong set aside in the ATP program going forward. So thank you so much for listening and letting me speak for as long as you have. Appreciate you doing this important project.
Thanks, Dave. Although, and you made some good points. I do have to disagree with your last point though, because the program is severely underfunded. How many did we not fund last cycle?
We did not fund 304 projects.
304 projects were not funded last cycle. We only funded, what, 50 out of the statewide?
So yeah, 50
Yeah.
statewide, and then
So-
another 50 in the
So,
MPO.
so when Mara
I totally agree.
making
We
her
need more money for the program. It's not that
Yeah.
we don't need more money for it, but non-infrastructure projects are just as underfunded. They just have been largely ignored a lot up to now.
Yeah, but I think that, okay. Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
Next, we have Victoria Cacciatore.
Okay, there, now I'm unmuted. Thank you. It's Victoria Cacciatore with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. And I wanted to somewhat echo some of the things that Maura had said about how underfunded this program is. I work for a region that covers 6 counties and 28 cities. 25% of those cities have either never applied to ATP or have sat out of it since cycle 1. They just do not feel like they have any chance of success. So I think that when we're talking about non-infrastructure projects project sponsors feeling discouraged, a lot of people feel discouraged from applying to ATP because they feel like it's effort on an application that doesn't stand a chance because there is so much demand. These cities have active transportation needs. It's not that they don't. Some of them are severely disadvantaged. I also try to provide whatever support I can to them, but I think that we are dealing with a much larger issue than non-infrastructure project sponsors feeling, or program sponsors feeling like they don't stand a chance in the ATP. We're all feeling the crunch of this. Also have a lot of great examples of non-infrastructure programs, standalone and programs that were coupled with infrastructure improvements, where the local agency was able to partner with community-based organizations or with their public health department to have these programs that taught the people in the community more of like how they could use their community like at the human scale, how they could walk and bike places, and it culminated with a large infrastructure investment that has been phenomenal for many of our areas. I think I also invited you guys to a walk to school event in Yuba County once. That's one of our great examples of how we've been able to couple the non-infrastructure programs with infrastructure investments in a way that really brought in more people from the community to celebrate the investments being made. So I just wanted to say those bits about or for consideration in this. Based on the numbers that you shared at the beginning, it doesn't seem like there's an incredibly strong case for a non-infrastructure set aside in addition to what is being funded, as much as there is a significant case for more funding for active transportation program.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Victoria.
Up next, we have Carl Anderson.
Hi again, Carl Anderson with MTC. Just want to align some of my comments with what Corey had said earlier. It seems like the numbers aren't showing that a non-infrastructure set aside is critical for the statewide component, but I would just implore the CTC staff to allow regions the flexibility to include that component in their regional programs if they want. And then one other thing I just wanted to comment on, Lori, you asked what a reasonable set aside would be if we did pursue this. I think it'd be useful to take a look at what the Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure funding that was rolled into the ATP program during the program's inception, what that amount looked like. And maybe that could just be a good jumping off point for that discussion if we get there. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Carl. Thank you.
Next, we have Peter Williamson.
Hi again. Thank you for taking all these questions. This is Peter Slocog. So another comment I wanted to add, just kind of, I think outside of what's been said so far, is related to non-infrastructure. It's typically maybe thought of as programmatic, and once the cycle's done, it goes away. But one consideration that kind of puts it on par with these other categories is the cumulative nature of these cycles. So building on what you've done, if you were awarded cycle 2, 3 funding, such as equipment that doesn't go away, or maps that you create for schools that don't go away, and train the trainer programs that don't go away. And another point, and also, sorry, kind of related to that, OTS funding sort of comes back each year and refunds the projects almost cyclically. So I wonder, I don't know if there's a scoring metric used for cumulative, like if you're building on a project that you've done in a past cycle, if that's awarded any extra consideration. And then the other point I wanted to bring up was the adaptability of non-infrastructure. You might put in an infrastructure application, and if things change, it can be massively more expensive or less expensive. We had a school, part of the non-infrastructure application, that literally that school, it doesn't exist, or it's, you know, kind of being decommissioned. So we were able to pivot to another disadvantaged school as part of non-infrastructure. So there's also, it's not related at all to the cumulative concept, but the adaptability almost adds a unique aspect to funding non-infrastructure projects. They might be more reliable. Thank you.
Thank you.
A written question we received from Joel Campos. They write, perhaps a dumb question, but does non-infrastructure also include plans, not just programs, such as a countrywide bike plan?
No, so plans are a separate project type within the ETP, and they currently have a actual cap. So there's a 2% cap on plans, meaning that only 2% of our programmed projects, of the funds for our program projects, can be planned. And we usually don't meet that cap. We usually don't have a problem with that cap in terms of what we're funding.
A written comment received from Judith Plakov. They write, I believe that the California SRTS non-infrastructure program, before it was rolled into the ATP, was 24 million. I'll add that the funding for the former SRTS non-infrastructure used to be formulaic. There were SRTS non-infrastructure programs in each of the 12 Caltrans districts. So really nice statewide participation in SRTS education and encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment.
I see no other attendees looking to make public comment at this time. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Justin. All right, so Alika, can you go to the next slide, please?
Okay, so thank you for that discussion. That was really good. That gives us a lot of things to think about. So we'll keep considering this and think about what all the points that everyone made, and come back next workshop with some sort of proposal of what we would see doing. So unfortunately, there was at least one other issue around non-infrastructure that a stakeholder had wanted to discuss, and that was there is a component of non-infrastructure that's enforcement. the particular stakeholder that brought it up is not on this workshop. And so I feel a little bit like, I think that we can bring up the topic, see if people have feelings about it, or if Emily and Summer from Caltrans, who are non-infrastructure experts, if they would kind of try to explain the issues surrounding it, we could do that. But I think, to be fair, I don't want to close this topic when the person who brought it up is not on this workshop. That doesn't seem like fair engagement to me. So anyway, Emily and or Summer, maybe, or if anyone else understands the issue about enforcement in NI and how and what that is the issue in the ATP program. If they want to bring it up now, that's fine. So we'll wait a minute.
We do have a couple attendees with their hand raised at this time. Up first, we have Jennifer Salas.
Thanks. I'm not sure I understand the concern yet of the person who's not on or who brought it up, but I will say that we at Fresno COG are currently working on a multi-jurisdictional local road safety plan, and I do also sit and serve as the RTPA representative on the Strategic Highway Safety Plan steering committee. And I do know that the 4 E's, enforcement, education, and sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the other two, but they are all components in all of those plans. So I think it would make sense to keep those aligned and also keep that included in the NI portion. So I think what I'm understanding is they are looking to take out enforcement or maybe not include it for a particular reason, but I would encourage to keep that in because it does align with the statewide SHSP. And I'm sure quite a bit of agencies are working on their local road safety plans, which is also incorporated as well. So that's my comment there.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. It is partly taking out the E of enforcement. The other ones are encouragement and engagement and education. And there's some sensitivity around the idea of enforcement, but I don't want to claim to really understand it very much. So that's why I need, if anybody is interested in this topic, that's why I was hoping to see if anybody else had any thoughts on it. Is someone, Corey was going to talk, I think.
Next, we have Corey Wilkerson. Corey, you're free to comment.
I mean, obviously there's been a lot of changes that are happening in the ease as it was. The Safe Routes to School partnership was probably one of the first community-based organizations that removed the enforcement E from their list of E's, and it was replaced with equity. There is a lot of changes and concerns about the heavy use of enforcement in in traffic violence situations and Vision Zero plans and stuff. There's always been kind of a heavy emphasis in enforcement in those. I would just like to mention that I don't think that there is ever a reason why ATP funds should be going towards funding enforcement activities. You know, having enforcement agencies as part of the stakeholders group should be something. It should be a decision that the local agency is able to make. And if they want to include them or they don't want to include them, I think it should be entirely up to them. And the program should not be dictating whether or not enforcement agencies are required as part of the stakeholder group. But I would urge that the program being so limited in funding as it is, that our funds do not go towards enforcement activities. Most of those activities are heavily funded through other sources, and I would hate to see such a small pot of money be going towards something that there certainly is a perception out there that it's heavily funded as it is.
Thanks, Corey.
Next, we have Dave Campbell.
Hello again, Dave Campbell from Bike East Bay, Alameda, Contra Costa counties. And we're a bike ped transit advocacy organization. We've taken a strong position in the last several years against enforcement, particularly in the last couple of years, given the experience and the information and data that we're getting from local cities, particularly Oakland, Richmond, here in the East Bay, showing the racial bias in policing against residents, including, you know, when you do, say, a pedestrian sting type operation, which we sometimes fund from transportation funding sources. And so I do agree, I think we should take enforcement out as an eligible category. There may be some exceptions in there that completely address the racial bias of enforcement, and perhaps the benefits outweigh that. I am not a total expert on all those options, but first and foremost, I would support taking it out. But second, if some piece of it stays in, I think that jurisdiction has to at least show first that they fully understand and have publicly disclosed their racial bias in policing data, and not just say, well, we're complying with the new state rules on that. They need to show that they are collecting that data, they're analyzing it, and they're acting upon it locally to improve safety. And I think that's the condition I would keep to any money that stays in enforcement with this program, is cities need to understand the racial bias issue. And if they don't, they're not eligible for it. But I do agree with the previous speaker. I think it's preferable not to have it in here.
Thanks, Dave.
From Jeannie LePage, she writes, we've used enforcement money for crossing guard training and curriculum development, so a more inclusive definition of enforcement is needed.
Thanks, Jeannie.
And then a written comment from Denise Montes. She writes, I do not have a microphone, but would like to give my input on the set-aside for standalone non-infrastructure. I am not in favor of creating a set-aside for standalone non-infrastructure projects. I feel it lowers the bar for the quality of non-infrastructure projects that are awarded funding. Quality non-infrastructure projects will score high enough to be awarded funding through ATP. Thank you. And that concludes all public comments that I see at this time.
Thanks, Justin.
Okay. Justin, I just wanted to clarify, because when Dave mentioned the pedestrian sting operations, I don't know, that sounds very violent to me. And so I just checked and with our non-infrastructure experts, and the ATP does not fund something like that. So I just want to be clear on that we are not funding that kind of a thing. So Okay. So, like I said, the stakeholder that was most interested in this is not on. So I think we'll talk about this a little bit more at the January 11th workshop. So, but thank you for those comments so far. Before we close about non-infrastructure, is there any final comments on it? Any other things about non-infrastructure in the guidelines that people think need to be addressed? And one of them is that, and I think it was Teresa brought it up, that I didn't think of, but it's something that we could talk about and might help with if we don't do a set aside is removing the tiebreaker criteria of that first priority goes to infrastructure. So that would be something, if anybody has any comments on that.
We do have a couple of attendees with their hand raised at this time. Up first, we have Judith Flockoff.
Hi, this is actually Victoria Custodio with the California Department of Public Health. Judith, my colleague, registered me for this webinar, so it's her name that's been being read. But I just wanted to chime in. Sorry, this doesn't build off your question, Lori, but I wanted to just revisit an idea that you and I had emailed each other about, and it was focusing on older adults and the pedestrian safety of older adults, and some issues that were brought up by the Department of Aging. So, you know, in exploring ideas for a possible non-infrastructure set aside, you know, there are probably ways that the CTC and Caltrans could really do something to the same effect that they did with quick builds and try to, you know, kind of encourage, you know, more projects in the areas where we really need to see some, you know, quality programming. So in the area, for example, of older adults, you know, more focus on pedestrian safety, combination of education, encouragement, and infrastructure improvement is definitely, you know, some, you know, is definitely, I think will translate into improved safety for our seniors. So I think there's probably a way, you know, if in fact this a set aside is set to encourage the kinds of innovative or targeted programming for, you know, higher risk groups for say injury, or groups that are underutilizing active transportation based on, you know, demographic studies that we have. So for example, you know, communities of color are not engaging in bicycling as much as other communities, women not bicycling as much as men, different groups. I think adolescents need a lot of safety education and maybe in a different kind of format than it's traditionally offered. Lots of kinds of creative ideas. So maybe if in fact the non-infrastructure idea is set aside is pursued, that there could also be a way to kind of direct that programming to really uplift the kinds of efforts that we know will support you know, more equitable health outcomes in select groups or areas of the state. So that's it.
Thank you, Victoria. And this isn't exactly what you were saying, but it did make me think of something that if we don't end up doing a set aside, you know, I'm not saying what we're going to propose either way right now, but there are ways other than a set aside that could help to encourage more non-infrastructure applicants and how they score. And that's in like what Victoria was talking about in the scoring rubrics and the application. If there's a way that we can strengthen those where they're more competitive. So that's another avenue that we can think about too.
Up next, we have Dave Campbell.
I'll just kind of repeat what I said before. I mean, I really appreciate you're doing this, Lori, and providing such a focus and emphasis on non-infrastructure projects. But I would caution against a tiebreaker in favor of capital projects. I think it just underscores my concern that there's still many people in the transportation profession who feel like capital is a better thing than a non-infrastructure. And it just says, yeah, that's still true, but we're trying to fund non-infrastructure. And so maybe
Dave,
another way
hang
to.
on a second. Hang on. So we actually already do favor infrastructure over non-infrastructure in a tiebreaker. So we're already doing that. So what I'm suggesting is that we undo that, where we.
Oh, great.
Okay.
You have my 100% support. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
See no other attendees looking to make public comment at this time.
Just to talk about tiebreaker, we have every cycle now. We have ties at the cutoff every single time. We have it at the statewide and the small urban and rural. So we have to have tiebreakers. And I'll be honest that an infrastructure project that's our first tiebreaker, because there is a bias towards infrastructure. It's clear in that tiebreaker. So I can see value in removing that, but we'll just have to make sure that we can still do the tiebreaker. So we can look at the tiebreaker language and see what we can work on there. Okay. Any other? I'm going to give it another minute. Okay.
We do receive one additional written comment from Michael Cucker, who writes, non-infrastructure programs are useless if the infrastructure is not there to support the non-infrastructure effort. Thank you.
Okay, we'll give it just another minute. See if any other last comments come in. If not, like I said, we'll revisit this at the January 11th. And let's see. Okay. Thank you, everybody. That's exactly. A reasonable proposal. So thank you, everybody. Okay, what's next? Okay, so next we were going to talk about leveraging. This is another issue that came up as something to revisit, and it's that, so right now, we do score on leveraging, and let me be clear, I'm talking about leverage funds, not match funds. The ATP does not require matching funds. This is bringing in other funds to a project that will give you additional points, but it's not required. Okay, and this is right now, it's in the medium and the large application. And the goal is to commit other funds to the projects, with the assumption that that means that the implementer will put a higher priority, and it will help ensure that the project is completed. And right now, what we say is funds allocated by the commission on a project-specific basis are not eligible for leveraging points. In-kind and non-infrastructure funds are not eligible for leveraging points, and applicants are required to submit documentation to substantiate leverage. And that would mean like a board resolution or something, right, Beverly? That's mostly what we've seen, or a letter showing the commitment to the leveraging the funds. Okay, so what we wanted to talk about is should we continue scoring on leverage in the medium application, or should we, alternatively, we still score on it, but we change the percent thresholds? And then if there's anything else about leverage, although the taking in-kind as leverage, we're not going to do that. So that's kind of off the table. It's just too hard for us to manage and track and to even legitimize. So, okay, so this is the discussion about leverage. So we're, is there anything else I'm supposed to say here? Or is that, okay. All right, so that's the discussion. What do people think about leverage?
We have Dave Campbell. All right, Dave lowered his hand. We have Corey Wilkerson.
Sorry, I didn't mean
I'm
to
just
lower
going to
my hand.
reiterate. I'm just going to reiterate all of my my previous comments on leveraging. I think that if we can remove leveraging for the medium-sized projects, that would be ideal. I know that there's always been this kind of belief that leveraging somehow means that the local agency has skin in the game and is therefore going to is more likely to implement or complete the project. And I've always steered people away from that belief. I don't think that that is accurate. I think that having money in the project is almost never, at least in my experience, it's almost never been a determining factor in whether or not a project is completed. I've seen local agencies give back grant funds. I've seen local agencies that they had money invested in because of community opposition and things like that. And I think that continue to include points associated with it. I think that the idea behind the leveraging was that it would kind of serve as a counterbalance to the disadvantaged community bias that this program has had because of how competitive the grant funds are. But I don't think that leveraging is the way to correct that. And I think that by requiring or by putting points towards it, which essentially requires leveraging for medium, would require leveraging for medium and large projects that we're going to be discouraging less, lower resource cities from being able to apply for these funds because they do not have the leveraging funds available. And I think that we're going to see that there'll be negative impacts associated with that. So if we can start moving away from applying points for leveraging, I think that leveraging is good if the local agency has money for it. Then yeah, obviously it means that more money can go towards the program. But I don't think that it should be a determining factor in whether or not a project gets funded or not.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, I agree with you with what you said. I don't like this idea that it's somehow offsetting the disadvantaged community points. I don't think that's, I just don't like that concept. And the leveraging points, like every point last cycle, it did make a difference. It made a big difference in projects getting funded or not. I asked Alika to pull up the number of points that we give by percent of leverage on the medium, just so we can see that, so everybody knows what we're talking about. Here it is. Okay, so you get 1 point for 1 to 5% of total project costs, 2 points, well, up to 5 points for more than 20% of total project cost. So a compromise that we could make on this is that instead of totally getting rid of points for leverage, we could change this to, I don't know, something else where it's, you get 5 points for 10% and then scale it down from that. That's one way that we can still have this idea of leverage in the program, but it's not such a burden on agencies that don't have the access to other funds and that other agencies do. Or we could also change the points altogether, make it out of 3 points or something. And then we'd have a couple points go somewhere else. So that's a couple of ideas. Any comments, Justin?
Up next, we have Dave Campbell.
Hello again. Sorry, I hit the wrong button last time. Lori, if you could put the previous slide up. My suggestion was make leveraging your tiebreaker. If you lose capital versus non-infrastructure preference as a tiebreaker, substitute it with the matching money and let that break your tie as one option. And then the other bullet point in your previous slide about non-infrastructure programming not being eligible for leveraging, I would support making it eligible. I think, again, that's my point today, is it's just as legitimate as any capital in kind or capital match or capital pledge, whatever you call it. And there's no reason to separate it. As I understand it, this stuff is all self-reporting, so cities and jurisdictions should be able to self-report a program just as readily as they can, money for a capital project.
Okay, so Dave, it's an interesting idea about using leverage as a tiebreaker. That's an interesting idea. I'm not sure what I think about that. I'd like to hear comments on that. But I don't want to say that we're not saying that non-infrastructure is legitimate or not legitimate. It's not that at all. It's just for leverage, it's just always been about actual funds. And I don't even know how that would work using non-infrastructure program as leverage. I think that would be, it's hard for me to comment on that because Caltrans does the tracking on that, and I do not want to put them in a position of something that it's totally impossible for them to do.
I agree. I don't want to make it too hard to report, but it's my understanding cities self-report on this stuff, and they can self-report on a safe school program that is in the jurisdiction as readily as they can their matching funds or their contributing funds.
Maybe, but if someone from Caltrans is on that wants to comment, I'd be happy to hear.
I don't see anybody from Caltrans yet. Wait, what was it? Oh, we got Desiree Fox. So, okay.
Hi. Hold on just a second. Okay, sorry about that. I had stepped away and tried to use my phone. So what was can I hear just the issue again? It was related to leverage being used as like an NI project being used as leverage. Is that what it was used?
Yeah, so currently, non-infrastructure funds are not eligible for leveraging to count towards leveraging points, and we're not sure. Lori, go ahead.
So I guess it would be, say you're paying for a non-infrastructure program along with your infrastructure. You're paying for it out of local, that would not count towards leverage.
Yeah, so when we look at leverage, we look at actual dollar amounts being used, and it's applied per phase. So we wouldn't be able to combine. We look at the NI phase as being something completely separate. So if you wanted to apply leverage towards an NI phase, you could, but you couldn't use an NI project as leverage towards a phase, because leverage has to be actual dollars. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not something that we would be able to do.
I think what Dave is saying is that it's self-reporting anyway. So if you're self-reporting on dollars, then what's the difference in self-reporting on non-infrastructure? I think that's what Dave's point.
Yeah, but when we look at leverage, we look at ratios of dollars. So when they're invoicing, they would get back the amount in like a percentage of the amount that they're invoicing and that they're leveraging versus the ATP dollars. So, you know, if they're leveraging 10% for that phase, they would invoice and we would give them back 90%, and then the other 10% would come from their own funds. That's how we look at leveraging when it comes to like invoicing for projects.
Okay. Thank you, Desiree.
Up next, we have Carl Anderson.
Everyone, Carl Anderson, MTC. In the spirit of keeping the guidelines consistent with last cycle, MTC is still supportive of keeping the leveraging funds for medium projects. Mainly, it keeps the ATP consistent with the other CTC allocated programs, where Commission is routinely encouraging funding partnerships to deliver these transportation projects. We also support the expanding of the eligibility of funds that could count as leverage. I think last workshop it was David Ruperta who mentioned allowing project sponsors to identify SHOT funds as leverage. We can also extend that to SB1 LSR funds, and maybe we can add language in the guidelines that encourages sponsors to look at those fund sources and use those as leverage. If the Commission staff and stakeholders are still intent on accommodating or making it easier for the smaller jurisdictions or smaller projects to compete, then I would support adjusting the project size thresholds and keeping the leveraging points for both medium and large as a compromise. And then I also want to say I'm supportive of adding leveraging as a tiebreaker criteria. I think that's an interesting idea to think about.
Carl?
Yes.
Why should we use SHOP as leverage? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
It's just an additional funding source that some jurisdictions have access to, depending on what their communication is with Caltrans or what projects Caltrans is prioritizing in that area. And if there's a project that aligns that can deliver some active transportation components, then and if it can make a better and bigger project, then I see that as being a good idea.
I think when this gets down to the fundamental question I always have about leverage is what is the point of it? And if it's to show a commitment of local funds, SHOP doesn't do that. If it's something else, then I can see it. And so I guess I don't. I think it's never been totally clear to me what is the basic point of leveraging funds, why we give some priority to that.
I don't think it's solely focused just on local funds coming to the project, but any funding source from any other grant program or federal program or state program, just to show that there's partnership in delivering these projects. I mean, that's something that is encouraged in all the other SB1 guideline, and that's something that the CTC likes doing. I mean, everyone always wants to be the last dollar in, and no one wants to be all the dollars in on a project. So I think that's the point of leveraging.
Thanks, Carl.
We do have a few more attendees with their hand raised at this time. We have also received several written comments and questions. Written comments submitted from Ditas Esperanza. I think we should continue to give 5 points for medium applications with leveraging. They followed up by saying that they are okay with 3 points. From Lawrence Jimmer, they write, I support current methodology for points for leveraging for both large and medium projects. From Mike Woodman, they write, I would not support leveraging as tiebreaker because it favors those that have additional funding against those agencies that do not. And Mike followed that up by stating, while I generally support leveraging in most funding programs, the competitive nature of the ATP makes every point critical, and it is often hard for smaller agencies and rural jurisdictions to commit leveraging funds. I would support re-evaluating the scoring rubric on leveraging. Mark Friedlander writes that they support Corey's comments on leveraging, and they're supportive of either removing or revising the scoring criteria. David Ruperta writes, in-kind match are allowed for Caltrans sustainable planning grants, but it makes the invoicing process very complicated. I would not recommend allowing in-kind match being used for leveraging for the ATP. We do have a few attendees with their hand raised at this time. Up next, we will have Stephen Hanamaikai. Stephen, you are free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hey, thank you. Stephen Hanamaikai, San Luis Obispo Council of Governments. I appreciate this presentation, and I agree that, and maybe to the chagrin of one of our member agencies, DITAS, so I apologize, but maybe an idea to think about is getting rid of the points for leveraging and instead allocating them maybe to projects that have completed some pre-construction activities, so outreach and design and environmental, or environmental and design. I think it would encourage agencies to focus on projects that that they've vetted against the ATP and the cap tie, and that align with those and with the different policies within that, and be developing and having a better understanding of what is going to be included in the project and what the true cost is. I think there is some risk to the local agencies when they submit an application for a project that really, that is kind of maybe the lowest level of a PSR equivalent. They find themselves in situations where they have to come back and use more local funds to deliver the project, and it just becomes more of a challenge. I think right now they're used as project development, where it is in the project development phase, is used as maybe a tiebreaker now. But I think just adding points to projects that have completed some amount of pre-construction, I think it could encourage more thoughtful assessment of what projects should be in the ATP, and maybe get rid of some of that risk that I think CTC and also the local agencies take on when applying for a project that maybe has not gone through environmental. And that's all. Thank you.
So, Steve, that's a really interesting idea. The thing is that we kind of end up in the same place though when we do that, is because the reason that the ATP, which differs from most of the SB1 programs, we do fund pre-construction with the belief that we get applicants that don't have access to funds to fund pre-construction. So it kind of puts us in the same place in a way. But it is an interesting idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Shelley Kwan.
Hi, this is Shelley Kwan from LA Metro, and I wanted to also take this opportunity to make a comment about the non-infrastructure program that I wrote in earlier, but I don't think was read unless I missed it when I was wrangling my cat. So just wanted to say that it doesn't seem, based on the statistics, that there's a need for a standalone set aside and NI set aside, and especially if that means awarding lower scoring non-infrastructure projects above other project types. Yeah, I think we should just award projects as they score, although definitely there's a huge need for more ATP funding to make sure all sorts of project types get the funding they need. And now my comment in terms of the leveraging is that I think we should keep the points, especially because we keep acknowledging that the ATP is super underfunded. These points will encourage applicants to add their own funds and make the ATP funds go further. I don't have a position on the changes to the scoring for the points right now, but I'm sure I will when we get around to that workshop. And then finally, I wanted to see if there was any more thought to making the local partnership funds, the formulaic partnership funds, eligible as leveraging, like the STIP is.
Thank you, Shelley. Yeah, so I think we will consider looking at those other funding sources and making them count towards leverage. I think that we can consider that. Nobody's commenting on possibly changing the percents. So I don't know if that's a bad idea or I don't know. I'm kind of hearing either not have points or have them the same way. That's okay.
Carl Anderson?
I think it might be too early to make a decision on changing the percentage breakdown or the point breakdown until we know what we're going to do about the project size threshold. Because 10% of 7 million is a lot different than 10% of 5 million, depending on what we decide there. And then I do want to make a comment on what Shelley had just said. While MTC would be very supportive of counting the local partnership funds as match in the active transportation program, only a select few counties throughout the state or even cities are actually eligible to receive those local partnership funds, those formula funds. So that would be that would put other jurisdictions at a pretty severe disadvantage if we did open up those funds, and I just want to be aware of that.
But wouldn't the doing the same thing for the shop, wouldn't it be the same thing? Because then you're counting on that Caltrans is going to make the project a priority in the shop. So I don't understand the difference.
Well, the shop isn't inherently exclusive. I mean, they're not saying that specific cities or counties aren't eligible for those funds, whereas the local partnership formula program is.
Okay.
And then the SB1 local streets roads funds goes to every jurisdiction in the state. And then STIP funds, every jurisdiction has an opportunity at those funds as well. So that's why I was asking for those.
Okay.
I mean, but don't get me wrong, we'd still be supportive if we want to make LPPC formula funds eligible, but I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that.
Okay, and Carl, I think you have a good point about since we haven't talked about changing the size threshold, that maybe that's why, because it could change this percent thing. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. I do want to make maybe one more comment just as food for thought. Since we don't really know what's going on with the ATP augmentation, and I know that there's still a lot of decisions that would need to be made on whether or not we're going to go back to cycle 5 projects and fund those, or encourage those applicants to apply for cycle 6. And I would just hate to put a jurisdiction that was at the cusp of getting funded in cycle 5, have them reapply under a different set of guidelines in cycle 6 and then fall short. So just something to chew on again. I just want to throw that out there. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Carl.
From Antonio Montes, they ask, what is considered a medium project?
A medium project is up to, let me go to the slide with that. has the, we'll put up the breakdown of the project threshold sizes. There it is. Okay, small is 2 million or less. Is that, and it's total project cost. Small is small project. This is infrastructure too, or infrastructure / non-infrastructure. So 2 million or less. Medium is 2 million up to 7 million, and large is over 7 million.
From Michael Cougar, they ask, what is being proposed to replace the scoring for leveraging, if anything?
Nothing yet.
From Moratumi, they write, I support Mike Woodman's comments on leveraging. From Gene Severinghouse, they write, points for leveraging are highly useful for motivating CAR-oriented local jurisdictions to contribute funds in order to access ATP funds. Keep 5 points, medium and large, both. From Paul Gergais, they write, if we reduce the number of points, then the percents would need to change too. I'm for this, or removal of leveraging bonus points altogether for better equity. From Michael Williams, they write, Carl's last point about potentially changing previous cusp projections is a good one, just something to think about. Thank you, and that concludes all public comment that I see at this time.
Thanks, Justin. I guess I will go back to something that Carl said, is that we really are trying to keep things as consistent as possible from last cycle. So I think in general, with that said, if something really needs to be changed, then we should consider changing it, but it has to be something pretty compelling. That doesn't mean that it couldn't change in the future, but it's just that last cycle 5 was so competitive, and so many, we had so many unsuccessful applicants. We're really trying to make it easy on the applicants to submit again. So anything that's going to have to change fundamentally what they're doing, we're trying to stay away from that. And leverage could do that, because for example, if they submitted a medium and they were counting on getting 5 points because they're putting in the leverage, we change that, then all of a sudden they've lost, or they could potentially lose 5 points. That's something I really don't like about that. Right or wrong, I don't like, we've tried to keep it consistent and not change the game, particularly this cycle. Okay. So thank you for that discussion. We will bring back a proposal time, and then we will wrap up all the discussion on leverage next workshop. Okay. So next, and this one is in a similar situation. This is changing the project size thresholds. We're bringing this to all of you because it came up as a topic that something that stakeholders wanted us to consider is changing the thresholds on the small, medium, and large. And the reason, I think I mentioned before, there's pros and cons to doing this. And so we can see that that project, what's considered a large project, could change because projects get more expensive all the time. So we can see there's a legitimate reason for maybe changing these thresholds. However, one thing is, if you submitted last cycle as a large, then we change this, you could be in the medium. You may want that, you may not. And so you may ask yourself, why would someone prefer to do the large application? Because it does have more questions. There's more to the application, and that's on purpose. some people prefer that. Some applicants prefer that because the large application does give you more room for discussing your project and the benefits of it and other aspects of it. So I can see that there are actually benefits to doing a large application over the medium. It just depends on how you look at it. So we said we would talk about this. So I'd like to hear some comments on changing the project thresholds, what they would be and how that would impact the applicants.
We have Corey Wilkerson.
Hey, so the price of infrastructure is going up, and we've seen increases during the pandemic as well. Projects cost assumptions that were made, like in cycle 4, I'm starting to hear from local agencies that they're falling short on the as they're getting into the design, they're getting ready to finalize the design, that they've seen costs go up, and now their projects are falling short on the funding side. So I think that we do need to look at particularly increasing the size of the medium project category. I think that it is appropriate. As someone who's spent a ridiculous amount of time writing these applications and filling out these applications from a local agency, at no point would I ever be mad about having to go from a large application that I filled out in cycle 5 to now having to fill out a medium application in cycle 6. It's I don't know. I can't think of a situation where that would be a bad thing. A lot of times the applications there is it's pretty easy to simplify, and some of these questions it's easier to combine. Particularly the safety question. I actually like the safety question formatting in the medium application over the large application because it's one giant field rather than a bunch of smaller fields. It allows you to focus on the safety aspects that are the most important to the project while not spending as much time discussing some of the other safety aspects. So I don't see there being a significant negative impact to local agencies that are going to be filling out these applications that are duplicating previous applications that perhaps scored well but not well enough, and they want to tweak and make it a little bit better. But it also may give rise to folks looking at applications where they perhaps were looking at applying for the near the top of the medium category before, but they were potentially putting themselves at risk of falling short on the application, and allowing them to go back and perhaps revise their cost estimates from the previous cycle so that it can be more accurate to what's currently happening. Local agencies do look at these thresholds, and if there's a project that's right on the cusp of the medium and large, and it's less work to do a medium application, they may be a little bit more aggressive on their cost estimating in order to keep underneath that threshold. And I think that that can be a dangerous practice. I know because I've done it.
But isn't that, Corey, isn't that going to happen no matter what it is?
Yeah, but when you see the pricing going up, it becomes more so. So like, you know, if you're applying for if you're working on an application and you're seeing that that you're, you know, right at that 7,000 or that 7 million mark, you know, you're more likely to see that go up than you are to see a larger estimate go up. You know what I mean? Because there's more detail in a larger estimate. Okay. There's more places where you can value engineer things to adjust the price, versus in a medium application, you have less opportunity to value engineer to stay within budget as you move forward with your project.
Okay, and just to be clear on what you said at the beginning, This doesn't have anything to do with funding cost increases, just to be sure that if somebody asked, was awarded 5 million in cycle 4, that's still what they're.
Yeah, they have to work with that. Yeah.
Okay.
I make it very clear to all the local agencies that I talk to that what you got is what you got. You got to work with what you got.
Okay.
And if you can't, then you need to find funding elsewhere, because there's not additional funding available in this program. But it does impact local agencies that are looking at projects that are right on the cusp of that medium and large application. As project costs, as the size and scope of the project gets higher, it does become a lot easier to value engineer and stay within the budget, versus these medium projects. Sometimes it can be tricky. Like, if you see something, I don't know, you see a rail, like an example, I just saw a rail crossing. They're asking for additional improvements at a rail crossing that was not assumed in the initial project budget, and so now they're like $1 million over budget, and they're trying to figure out how they can value engineer the project down to still be within their project and hopefully not have to do a scope change. But it's a lot harder to value engineer $1 million out of a medium project as it is to value engineer $1 million out of a large project, if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks, Corey.
Yep.
We received a written submission from Paul Gergeis. They write, if the concern is related to the rising cost of projects, could we simply add an inflation multiplier each cycle? Such a multiplier can be set well in advance of the applications going live to update agencies as quickly and regularly as possible.
Okay. This discussion is not about when agencies have cost increases. This is strictly about which application that they fill out when they apply. And that the thought is that the medium application is easier, so more agencies would prefer doing the medium over the large. So, and what was a large project 2 years ago is not the same as a large project now. And so the fair thing is to change these thresholds. That's what the discussion is. It's not about cost increases on projects or when costs go up. Often clarifies them.
So, from Luisa Zabla, they ask, is it being suggested that the medium range be expanded?
It could be all of them. We could make the small up to 3 million, and then the medium is 3 million to 8 million, or 3 million to 10 million, and the large is over 10 million. It could be whatever stakeholders think is reasonable, possibly. This is something that came from stakeholders, not from commission staff. This was not something that we were proposing. But because stakeholders asked us to talk about it, we are talking about it.
Okay, we do have Desiree Fox looking to speak. Desiree, free to unmute yourself and make a comment.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to clarify something that I had mentioned previously when we were speaking about using NI as leverage. I misspoke a little bit. If you have a combination project and you want to have your NI phase, you want to fund your complete NI phase,
then you can use that towards your leverage if it's part of your complete funding plan within the overall project. I'm sorry about that. For some reason, I was thinking it was just like, you know, being kind of thrown in there is just for the overall like infrastructure project. But yes, if it's a combination project, then you can use NI as leverage. Sorry.
Thanks, Desiree.
Next, we have Louis Al. Louis Al, you're free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Okay, thanks. This is Louis Al, OCTA. So a couple comments. First, I missed like the whole workshop until right now, so I apologize if I repeat anything.
Let's start over again, Louis.
No, it's okay. Please don't. Please don't. I think if we change the threshold in the medium large, going back to what we were talking about, any impacts to any of the prior projects, I think we have to keep in mind that there is a difference in what you can fund in a large project versus the medium. In the large project, you don't have to ask for everything, and that will impact any projects that get shifted from the large to the medium. So I think we need to keep that in mind if we make that change.
What do you mean by it? I don't understand. Explain that again.
So in the large project, you don't have to ask for construction, right? You can ask for any pre-construction phases as a standalone project. But in the medium, you have to ask for, and all the other applications, you have to ask for every single phase of work, including construction. So I think that's going to have some impacts, maybe.
Okay.
I don't know how many projects will be impacted by that, but that could be an impact. So,
okay.
And on the comments about the inflation, I think it kind of makes sense, only because we're seeing inflation across the board. So it may just, I think what the speaker was trying to say was just to make an automatic slight increase adjustment every single cycle to account for inflation. So it's not necessarily a cost increase for the project, but you're going to start seeing cost increases regardless, and it needs to follow the change in the economy. I think that's what they were trying to get at. It seems to me to make a little bit make sense. I don't know how that's going to be implemented. It may, and I think that's something that you may have to adjust and account for every single cycle, anyways. Just my thoughts on that.
Are you talking about in the cost estimate or in the?
No, in the thresholds, because a small in 5 years down the line, 2 million is not going to be a small project. 2 million is it may not even. You're going to see projects grow in size and cost over time just because of inflation by itself. Yeah, so I think that's what they're trying to get at, and I don't think that's a bad idea.
But these sizes, when we broke these up by size, it was arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't some sort of scientific analysis on what is a small project. We just made these up with the TAC, from what I remember, but they seemed reasonable.
So I guess
it's not really connected to anything, I guess I'm saying.
Yeah, and I guess then we're gonna have to revisit this probably almost every year, every cycle then at this point, is kind of what I'm gonna get at, because there are gonna be cost increases and changes over time, and the program needs to be able to account for that. Whether we decide to keep a small project, I know $2 million 5 years down the line may not even cover anything. So I think that's something we need to keep in mind, that we may see this change over and over and over again every single cycle. We may have to have this conversation over and over again every single cycle. And that's where that automatic inflation change may make sense.
Okay, but so I wanted to go back to something that Louis said, which is actually really important, that in the large, if you fill out that large, if your project is considered a large project, you can request pre-construction only, but only in the large, correct? Yes, that is correct. Okay, so if we change this, that's actually going to push out some that, let me get this right. Some projects would be in the medium, that were in the large. So ones that had requested pre-con only, they're then in the medium, and they would have to request construction, which is potentially a major change. So to me, that's a big reason not to do it, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking right now. But any other comments, Justin?
Up next, we have Nafili Barrett.
Hi, thank you. Nafili Barrett with the Mendocino Council of Governments. So first I'll say I actually didn't, the issue that you just mentioned, the ability to request project development components only, I did not realize that was limited to just the large category. So I guess that is something to consider. That must have, I know it was not always the case. However, I do think that it makes sense to increase these thresholds. As other commenters have said, you know, $2 million just doesn't buy a whole lot anymore, and $7 million, it's very easy to have a project that, you know, in terms of the overall outcome, you might think of as a medium project, but because of the cost, maybe due to the complexity of construction or project development, ends up being, you know, just dollar-wise in the large category. So I would support increasing these. You know, for instance, if you have, you know, say in a rural county, you might have higher mobilization costs that make the project cost more expensive, but you're not actually getting a larger project in terms of the finished product as compared to somewhere else where the same project might cost less. Similarly, if you have a lot, you could have higher project development due to you know, natural resources in the area, biological resources, cultural resources, something like that, that could easily increase project cost without actually resulting in a large project other than just project cost. So I think it's worth considering increasing these maybe by 25%.
Thanks, Nafili.
Corey Wilkerson commented, you know, for medium being 3 million to 10 million, sounds good to them. A written comment from Robert Ovadia. They write, I believe that the previous suggestion was to increase the project thresholds by an annual inflation factor, such as 3 to 5% per year or cycle. Paul Guergeis, who made the earlier comment about, let's see. Well, basically, he wanted to comment that the sound went out. I understand that the cost of projects going up is indeed the discussion, since a medium-sized project is now the cost of a large-sized project. The increase of the cost is inflation-based, so setting an inflation multiplier for our project size thresholds makes sense to reflect the appropriate costs of projects. The sizes are arbitrary, and inflation index keeps the original values. Thank you. Joseph Stramaglia comments that they think the thresholds are fine where they are. Wilkerson. Corey, you are free to unmute and make a comment.
I think that we may need to, based on what Lewis added, you may want to put a little pin in this and look at some data to see how many projects only applied for pre-construction as a large project, but the overall project cost fell within that, say, $7 million to $10 million range. If there are projects that are in that, if there are projects that are in that threshold where they're only applying for pre-construction, those applicants should probably be relooking at their cost estimates given the increasing cost of project costs that we are seeing with local agencies trying to implement these. And it's not necessarily across the state. It might be certain, you know, a lot of times those costs are very regional given the the costs associated with contractors being able to keep workers working, and increasing labor costs that are associated with that. What some contractors, they used to be able to pay employees $15 an hour, are no longer able to pay them that and be able to keep their employees, so they're having to pay more, and it kind of trickles out down from there. So if there are projects that are falling within that threshold where they may go from being a large project to a medium project, they should really be looking at their cost estimate to see whether or not that is still the correct cost estimate, and that they should be revising that cost estimate, which will likely put them back in the large category again, and therefore allow them to apply for pre-construction again. I know Lewis brought this up because OCTA does frequently apply for pre-construction activities on specific projects, where they would not be the lead agency in the construction, but they want to help local agencies with getting the design done. So for Lewis, I would say go back and look at your project, because your project cost might go up and you might still end up being in the large project category to begin with. But all that is to say, can we look at that data and see how many projects could potentially be moved, and whether or not that is enough to, there's enough examples there to warrant us not increasing these thresholds this cycle.
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay.
Thanks, Corey.
From Maria Carrillo, she writes, would like to comment on changing the percentage. They're too high and leveraging is a burden to our small city. Thank you for hearing our thoughts. Appreciate it. She goes on to comment that thresholds seem doable. Do have a couple of attendees with their hands raised at this time. Up next, we have Woodrow Deloria.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me, Lori?
Yep.
Well, I think I heard Nafili speak earlier, and I just support her concept of, I'm not sure what the percentage increase would be across the board, but as you know, as project costs increase, I think this program should be scalable, so that the same projects in the same order of magnitude are competing in the same pot of funds. I think that just makes sense to me. We're seeing a significant increase in cost, project delivery here, so I would support that. I don't know what percentage that is. I think we'd have to look at the actual statistics and dig a little deeper, but I think it definitely should be considered.
Say that again. What?
Which part?
I don't know what that last part you said. I'm not following that.
Well, I just think that the projects that are in the same order of magnitude should be competing in the same, threshold category.
Okay.
As we see project delivery costs increase, our a small project, 2 years ago may now be a medium project, but really, for all intents and purposes, it's still the same project. It's just that the cost of concrete, steel, and asphalt has increased, and project delivery has increased.
I guess, and I will fully admit that I could be just really stupid on this, but I guess I'm not getting that, like, when you're thinking about it, you don't have anything in your world that says what's a medium project or a small project or a large project, do you? It's just something that we kind of made up in this program to, okay. So I guess there's something I'm not understanding, that it may be that someone is going to have to very simply explain to me offline.
Well, when we have our breakout session with the rurals, maybe that's something we could talk about, because I know a lot of the rurals are seeing I don't know if it's a disproportionate increase, but a severe increase in project delivery costs.
Yeah, I totally get that. I don't understand how that corresponds to what application you fill out. That's what I don't get. Maybe Beverly has to explain it to me. She may be getting it. She's younger than me, so her brain.
I guess I would ask what was the purpose of breaking it down into these three categories if you're not expecting like projects to compete within each of those categories.
So the purpose is that if you're asking for 10, over 7 million or that was the arbitrary number that we came up with, that you should, there should be higher expectations for the application. This
Sure.
was all related to trying to streamline the applications. So, we heard that over and over again. So one thing that that we came up with along with the TAC was that if you were only asking for $1 million, you should not have to fill out the same kind of application as someone asking for 10 million.
Right.
That's what it was about.
But now, I guess what I'm saying is, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, a mile of class 1 might have cost $1.5 million. Now it might cost $2.5 million. It's the same project.
I understand that.
Right.
So I understand changing them because of, theoretically a small now is not the same as a small next year, but it doesn't really, but there's, people seem to be making some connection to like how they cost things and everything. And that's what I'm not getting, but I don't even know if it's relevant. So, but when you're saying that like projects compete against like projects, they are in that anything over 7 million is having to fill out the large application. Right. But they're still all competing in the same, out of the same 100 points.
Yes, but the level of effort that goes into each of those categories of application varies. And so if it's a class 1 in one jurisdiction that costs 3 times more than another jurisdiction, it's not an equitable level of effort.
Okay.
Just a thought. I'm not gonna die on my sword for this one.
Okay. Thanks, Woody.
Yep.
Next, we have Corey Wilkerson.
Lori, I'm just trying to clarify for you. Because of the increasing costs, project costs, every time you submit an application, you should be revising your cost estimate. If I submitted an application that was 6.9 million and therefore a medium project in cycle 5, for cycle 6, I need to go back and look at that cost estimate and see how it compares to the construction cost that we're seeing for unclassified excavation, for concrete, for asphalt. I have to go back and look at that cost estimate and revise it. Because of the increasing costs, I've now gone from a medium project that I applied for in cycle 5 to now I'm having to apply for a large project in cycle 6 where the project has stayed exactly the same. Every single cycle, we should be looking at these thresholds and determining whether or not we need to adjust them given what the changing in costs that have happened over the last 2 years. This should be something that we're doing automatically every single cycle. And so what some folks are suggesting is that we are applying an inflation rate to the thresholds every cycle, or we're just saying, all right, what makes sense, what sounds reasonable every single cycle. So this is just something that we're gonna have to reevaluate every cycle. And we've done, we went from, I think in cycle 3, or I don't remember which cycle, maybe it was going from cycle 3 to cycle 4 is when we increased the small application size from 1.5 million to 2 million, and the medium application went from, I think, 5 million up to 7 million.
Okay. So I kind of get what you're saying now, Corey, but I can't say that we're going to be able to come up with some like factor of inflation is 2%. So I mean
that's what happens when you let Lewis try and come up with a number versus when you let Corey try and come up with a number. Is that Lewis is going to try and put some inflation factor on it, and I'm just gonna go, right about here sounds about right.
Okay.
That's the difference between a finance person and a planner.
Yeah.
So, but either way, regardless, we're still coming to the same conclusion that we should be looking at these threshold sizes every cycle or every other cycle, whatever you guys feel comfortable with, to reevaluate whether or not cost increases have changed enough to where we need to adjust our thresholds.
Okay.
Because it's impacting, because you're right. We are seeing applicants resubmit applications from one cycle to the next. It's happening a lot. And when they reevaluate those cost estimates, are they having to go from small to medium or from medium to large? That makes a big change for them. And it's not something that we intended. We're trying to keep everything the same, but costs are not remaining the same. So we do need to be adjusting these thresholds every cycle. That's I think is the stance that everybody's trying to make. And I hope that makes it a little bit clearer for you as to why we're discussing this and why we seem to keep going back to this conversation every cycle.
I understand it more. I would not say I 100% understand it, but then but then we do have to think about what else it changes, like the
right. I agree with you, and so that's why I was mentioning before. Okay, well, if there's this one little rule in the guidelines that allows for large projects, for people that are working on a large project to be able to apply for pre-construction, and I still say that those people should be going back. Those people should be going back and reevaluating their cost estimate, because their cost estimate's probably going to go up, and they're probably still going to be in the large category anyways. But it would be interesting to see how many projects fall into whatever threshold we're talking about, going from 7 million to 10 million or whatever it is, and to see whether or not is there really a problem here, or is this or is Lewis peeing in the Cheerios and trying to make things more difficult? But yeah, so that's it would be good to know that information, but otherwise I still am going to advocate that we increase these thresholds this cycle, because we did see cost increases during the pandemic, because labor costs have increased during the pandemic. So
okay, thanks, Corey.
Got it.
Anything else, Justin?
Don't see any other attendees with their hand raised at this time, and we haven't received any additional written comments.
Well, so the only other thing do we have anything else other than the language changes?
No.
Okay, we'll do those next time, I think.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, we did a little bit better on time. This one, there was just one other thing we were going to do, but that should be fairly simple to cover in the next workshop. So I never leave us enough time for any action items to cover any action items. So Alika, do you take down any action items? Okay.
Can you read?
Okay, thank you, Lori. So these are a few of the action items that I took down during this workshop. Like I always mention, if there's something that I missed, please feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to add it to the list. So it looks like commission staff will be coming back at the January workshop and providing additional detail on the following things. So we will finalize the non-infrastructure set aside, and we'll look into the non-infrastructure tiebreaker as well. Also, at the January 11th workshop, we'll continue the discussion on enforcement in non-infrastructure. And we will also come back with a leveraging proposal at a future workshop. And as Corey had mentioned, we will also be looking into how many projects applied for pre-construction only, and look to see what their total project project costs were to see if they'll be affected with the application threshold change. And that's all I have in my notes.
Great. I didn't have anything else. Do you have anything else, Beverly, that you can think of?
Nope, that sounds good.
Okay, so we'll give it pause for a minute to see if we have any final comments. This was a good workshop. We had some good discussion, so I appreciate everybody being on. We're all just going to stare at Justin for.
We do have some comments coming in from Jeannie LePage. She states, "Thank you all. Have a great holiday." And we do have Lewis Dow looking to defend himself. Lewis, go ahead.
Thanks. For the record, Corey, you're still my friend. That's all.
These are Southern California problems. Don't mind us.
Feely Barrett thanks CTC staff for all their efforts. That's all I'm saying at this time.
Okay, well, thank you, Justin. All right, so this is our last ATP workshop for this year. So thank you, everyone. Happy holidays to everyone, and be safe. And our next workshop is January 11th. I was trying to think if there was another announcement I was going to, oh, I know what it was. We are pretty soon going to be putting out a call for evaluators, because as soon as we wrap up all of our guidelines, then we start training evaluators. So please consider being an evaluator. We would really appreciate it. It's very, very helpful to the program, and we will give you training and help you out in any way we can. And that was it. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. And Beverly or Lincoln, do you have anything else? No. Okay. Bye, everybody.